Well, I hope you'll take your Bibles and turn to Acts chapter 27. We'll be reading one of those great tales of the sea tonight and looking at that. I was telling the class this morning, I've been a lover of books since I have learned how to read. My mother did a wonderful thing. She bought the World Book Encyclopedia. You remember those? Ours were red. They were different colors. They weren't those old white ones. Ours were red. And I remember as a little fella, I started looking at those pictures and reading. I think I read the entire World Book Encyclopedia looking at that. And that was such a good thing. We didn't have video games and computer things and all. And what we did, if we wanted to, in stormy old rainy days like this, we'd sit down and read World Book Encyclopedias. And so I've loved books all my life. And I go to bookstores and I look around. And I remember being in a bookstore and there's this beautiful old book up there. I didn't buy it, but I looked at it. It was called Tales of the Sea. And there were many tales of the sea, tales of Columbus and tales from the wars and submarines and all kind of adventures from the sea that were in there. Sections from Moby Dick, and of course you remember Treasure Island and all of those tales in there. But what impressed me was the first one, the first of the tales of the sea was Acts chapter 27 from the King James Version of the Bible, and then on into chapter 28 about Paul's voyage to Rome. I was reading about this afternoon. There's not many tales of sailing the ancient Mediterranean that are like this one. Now there's fables and all. You can read about Odysseus and you can read about Jason and the Argonauts and all that, but they don't really go into the sailing part of it, just that they went to all these places. But here is a real account of a real voyage. And historians go to this and study this, and it's interesting. The researchers and even an old sea captain had taken this and that was used to sailing the Mediterranean, an old Scotch sea captain. And he was able to go through this and say, you know, everything Luke wrote about this journey to Rome is exactly what you would have expected for sailing in those days. Now, this was before the invention of the compass. They'd get out in that open sea where there's just water all around. How do you know where you are? Well, you didn't pull your cell phone out and say, Siri, what are my coordinates? You couldn't do that. How do you know where you are when you're sailing the sea? They didn't have the charts and the maps. They would pass it down, one seaman to another would explain how this is how we sail this part of the sea. This is where the currents are. This is where the winds are at this time of year. And with all that knowledge in their head, they would set out and they'd kind of know where they were going, but they never knew exactly where they would wind up until they began to see some landform they would recognize. And so here's what they did. They stuck close to the shore. They sailed in those routes that were very familiar, and they had those patterns, and Paul is going to follow one of those patterns. To get out into the open sea, you were really risking your life to do that. And so they would stick close to known area. They know if they headed out this way, that there'd be a big island out there somewhere. Cyprus would be out there somewhere. Crete would be out there somewhere, the big islands. And they learned by memory the little islands and landmarks along the way. And that's what we're going to read about. And about a time in this one where a storm caught them off guard and sent these sailors out into a region of the Mediterranean Sea they knew nothing about. And they were lost at sea in a tempestuous storm for 14 days. And at the end of this chapter, they're shipwrecked on an island and they don't know where they are. It's quite an adventure. And looking at it, read it like you would say, what's it like to sail on the old Mediterranean Sea? And that's what we're going to read tonight. It says in Acts 27 and verse 1, when it was determined that we should sail into Italy, remember taking Paul there as a prisoner to appear before Caesar, determined that we should sail into Italy. They delivered Paul and certain other prisoners. Now I want you to note there's other prisoners here. Paul and other prisoners to one named Julius, the centurion of the Augustus band. The Augustus band must have been a good band. They wouldn't just name any of those groups of 100 soldiers. That's what a centurion, he'd be in charge of 100 men. And these is the Augustus band, which sounds like quite an elite group of soldiers. And it's their job to transport these prisoners to Rome. And so entering a ship, we launched, meaning to sail by the coast of Asia. One Aristarchus, a Macedonian of Thessalonica, being with us. Two things to note there. Aristarchus, we read about him in the book of Philippians, in the book of Colossians. He's a fellow prisoner with Paul in Rome. Was he a prisoner at this time? Maybe. Maybe he was just incarcerated with Paul or kept with Paul. But Aristarchus is there. But it also says us. Remember the pronouns? When you're following through the book of Acts, when you read the we and us pronouns, you know that Luke is there as well. He's the one writing this. It's not they sailed, but we sailed. And Aristarchus is with us. So here we have Paul, Aristarchus, and Luke making this voyage to Rome. Now here's where they were. They're at Caesarea. And this is the path that they're going to take is the way we can only estimate. We don't know exactly the path they took, but there's some things in here where we can be pretty sure. Beginning at Caesarea, you see that arrow up there in Asia Minor? It's kind of out in the middle of that. That is a seaport in Asia Minor, Adramyttium. Now there at Caesarea, that's the arrow down there. That would be on your right. The arrow down at the right, that's where they're leaving. They're on a ship on the way to Adramyttium. That's not going to Italy. I tell you, when you were traveling on the ancient Mediterranean, you go to the port. It's kind of like getting out and hitchhiking. Somebody stops. Where are you going? Say, well, I'm going to Murfreesboro. And somebody says, well, I'm going as far as Woodbury. Come along with me. And he'll take you that far. And so that's what they're going to do. The centurion says, well, we got on this ship. It's going the right direction for now. It won't take us to Rome, but it's going to Adramyttium, and that's the way. And it's probably a ship on its way home to its home port. And so they come to Caesarea on a ship bound for Adramyttium, and you see the little wiggly line up there above the island of Cyprus. That's the coast of Asia. They kind of want to stay close to that coast as they make their way on this journey. So the next day we touched at Sidon. I'm going to show you these places. We touched at Sidon, and Julius courteously entreated Paul and gave him liberty to go unto his friends to refresh himself. Well, now that was not... Paul, if you want to, go on ashore. That centurion trusted Paul. I guess Paul, if he wasn't a trustworthy person, he could have made his escape then, but they'd eventually caught up with him, wouldn't they? Well, Paul, I give you leave. Go to shore. You got friends here. It's going to be a long journey. Take care of yourself. Maybe get a good bath, and get all cleaned up. It's going to be a while before you have another hot shower, I guess, before you make it on this trip. Get some supplies. It wasn't like a cruise ship. They weren't going to feed you roast beef and have all the things spread out, more food than you get. It's not going to be like that. If you're going to eat on the ship, you pretty well had to take your own stuff. You didn't have a cabin. You just find any place you can find on that slip to huddle down and sleep. Probably stay on the deck most of the ship. And so Paul, get what you need, and Paul's friends would take care of him there at Sidon. And then we launched from thence and sailed under Cyprus because the winds were contrary. The winds weren't blowing them the direction they would like to have gone, By sailing up close to Cyprus and sailing under Cyprus, it would shelter them from the contrary winds while they tried to make their way around that island and up around the coast of Asia. And we had sailed over the Sea of Cilicia and Pamphylia. We came to Myra, a city of Lycia, and there the centurion found a ship of Alexandria sailing to Italy, and he put us therein. They changed ships. This is as far as we're going on the ship of Adramyttium. We're going to get in the ship that has come from Alexandria and is on its way to Italy. So they changed ships. Here's where they've gone. They're at Caesarea. They touched at Sidon, and then they sailed under Cyprus. Sounds like they're using Cyprus to shelter them from contrary winds. You see that long point sticking out? Looks like a finger pointing out of Cyprus. That's where they would sail up around that and kind of loop that point and have a little shelter that way while they protected themselves from winds that were contrary, and then make their way along the coast. That would be the Sea of Cilicia and the Pamphylia. And then they made it over here to Myra, the city of Lycia. That's where they changed ships. You see the big fat arrow pointing down? It wasn't on the map. That's pointing to Alexandria. It's at the mouth of the Nile River. If you can imagine how that Nile Delta would fan out. Let's see if it'd fan out and it would be over at the far west corner of that Nile Delta was the city of Alexandria. It was common for grain ships to go from Egypt into Rome. And this may have been one of those big grain ships. And the historians tell us that they could load those ships filled with grain, and these were large ships. They could carry as many as 600 passengers. We're going to find out later there's 276 passengers on this ship that Paul is on his way to Rome. And so this big lumbering grain ship had made its way this far, still like those other ships, hugging the coast, you see, not getting out on the open seas where you're lost, but staying where they could see where they were. And so they get on this big grain ship, and there's 276 passengers on this ship, and they're going to try to make their way toward Rome. Well, we had sailed slowly many days. I bet that got tedious. The winds really weren't with them. They're making their way back and forth across the scope. They're not getting very far, very fast. And so time is a-wasting. And this is in the time of year where winter is coming on, and you didn't sail on those seas in the winter. So this must have been very tedious travel to sail slowly. They were come over against Sindus, the wind not suffering us. We sailed under Crete over against Saloni. Well, they thought if they can't go west, the direction they wanted to, we'll go southwest and slip around under Crete. And maybe with Crete blocking us from those contrary winds, we'd make our way around Crete and then make that trip over into Rome. But then hardly passing by it. Sounds like they just couldn't hardly get past that point, doesn't it? I mean, they're not making much progress and time's a-wasting. Hardly passing by it, we came to a place which is called the Fair Havens, nigh unto was the city of Lasea. Now, that sounds like a nice place, Fair Havens, but the sailors didn't think so. And Lasea is just a little old town. We don't want to spend the winter here in Lasea. I mean, this is not a good place to winter over. There's a better town just a little further on. If we get a chance, let's make it over to Phoenicia. Now, that's a good place to stay for the winter. But over here at Fair Havens and Lasea, this isn't where this will be a long winter. We try to wait it out here. Now, here's where they are. There's the island of Sindus. That's where they couldn't go west. The winds weren't cooperating. So they go southwest around that point of Saloni and then over to Fair Havens. I wanted to blow up that I'll show you that in just a minute. The geography right there plays right into this journey. Now, when much time was spent, well, that's what they didn't want a lot of time. They're trying to make, and the winter's coming on. Much time was spent, and when sailing was now dangerous, because the fast was now already past. That fast would have been the Day of Atonement. It's in late September, early October. And now, winter's coming. You know, it's like this around the world at that time. Sailing gets dangerous in the late fall and into November. You remember the wreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald, where they talk about the gales of November came early? That's what they're worried about. We're going to have some real storms coming up on this cold sea as winter comes on, and we can't sail then. And so much time was spent. Sailing is now dangerous because the fast was now already past. And Paul admonished them and said to them, Sirs, I perceive that this voyage will be with hurt and much damage, not only of the lading and ship, but also of our lives. Nevertheless, the centurion believed the master and owner of the ship more than those things which were spoken by Paul. Well, you might excuse that centurion. Who's Paul? Well, Paul's not a sailor. Paul's a prisoner. And this man, he is the master and owner of this ship. He's the one that knows what he's doing. He ought to be the expert here. And I'm not going to listen to this prisoner. I'm going to listen to the master and owner of the ship. And if he thinks we can go further, we're going to go further. That sounds like a centurion would be reasonable, but let me tell you something. Anytime you read something an apostle says in the Bible, that's better than the word of an expert. Remember that when you get to college, okay? These college professors, they do all this study, and they think they know stuff. And they think they're experts. And sometimes they are. But a lot of times they're not as smart as they think they are. And in any of these experts you find in college, any of you find these experts in college now, and they're going to say something different than what the apostle said, you better listen to the apostles. And that's what this centurion should have done. And so he says here, the centurion believed the master and owner of the ship. You might excuse him, but it was the wrong thing to do. He should have listened to Paul. And because the haven was not commodious to winter in, the more part advised to depart thence also, if by any means we might obtain unto Phoenicia. So Paul's outnumbered. I mean, he's outgunned and he's outnumbered here, and the centurion's going to go with the majority and with the experts. Now, that'll get you in trouble. So, they wanted to winter there at Phoenicia, which is a haven of Crete, and lieth toward the southwest and northwest. And then it looked like they were going to be able to do it. The south wind blew softly. Oh, that's a good sailing breeze. Now's the time to make the run for Phoenicia. Supposing they had obtained their purpose, loosing thence, they sailed close by Crete. See, they don't want to get out in open water. They're staying close to shore with a nice soft breeze. It all looks like it's going to work out, doesn't it? But not long after, there arose against it a tempestuous wind called Euroclydon. They had a name for this storm that would come in November, and it caught them unawares. And the ship was caught and could not bear up under the wind. We let her drive. What that meant was they lost control of their ship. This wind came upon them so sudden and so fierce, they knew they couldn't steer into anywhere they were going. Best thing to do is just let her run with the storm. And so they lost it. Now, here's the detail. Look up here real quick. You see the arrow on the far right? That's the little cape. They hardly got past Cape Salome. And then they came over here to Fair Havens, which is near to Lycia. With Lycia being that next area around, Fair Havens just a little beyond it. And I want you to look at that coast. Can you see it out there, that little jut sticking out? And look at that blue line that juts across there. That's where your Euroclydon winds came. They didn't pick up those winds. There's a little mountain range right there at the end, and it was butting against those mountains and heading out across the side, and all they had was a soft southern breeze, and did not know this fierce north wind was just behind those mountains. And so they rounded that coast. Where they're going is that arrow to the far left. Phoenicia. That's where they wanted to go. I blew that part up so you can see that little coast. You see the little corner there, Fair Havens? See the little protection? And they're going to go around that little point, and then they're caught in Euroclydon, and they lose control of the ship. That red line is where they wanted to go, but that blue line cutting across there, that's where the storm took them. And so running under a certain island which is called Clauda, we had much work to come by the boat. Now, that Clauda would have given them a little protection from that wind. As they were sailing around, they got past that island and that little barrier, and so now's the time to prepare the ship. We're headed out to sea. And so when they had taken up, they used helps. Much work to come by the boat. They must have been towing a little boat, like a little lifeboat. We're going to read about that earlier. With a lot of work, they were able to get that little boat that they were towing up onto the big boat where they were. And then they took ropes and just bound that ship up so it would hold tight, because they knew they were in for it. And so it says, fearing that they used helps to undergird the ship, and fearing lest we should fall into quicksand, strike sail, and so were driven. I mean, they took the sails down. They didn't want to go anywhere, but they couldn't help it. And they'd go anywhere slower without the sails. No more slow sailing now. And those quicksands had to do with those shallow sands and bars that were over on the coast of Africa. And many a ship had been lost on those sandbars. And they didn't want to get over there. And so they bring the sails down to try to slow down that movement that the storm is going to take them. And they don't know where they're going. Being exceedingly tossed with a tempest. The next day they lightened the ship. And the third day we cast out with our own hands the tackling of the ship. That sounds like they had some extra ropes and poles and machines and tools to help keep that ship. We can throw that out. We've got to get this ship lighter. We might hit those sands. We're going to see they continue to discharge from the ship, hoping that they can save the ship by abandoning their cargo. Well, there they go. That first arrow coming from the right over, that's Clauda. That's the last landmark they are going to recognize for over 2 weeks. The wind blew them away from that island. They were in the middle of a storm. And we don't know exactly where they went. This is a line but from here to Malta, we don't know where that ship went. This is a probable line of where they could have gone. But we don't know exactly. It says they went up and down. I don't know if that meant they went north and south, or if that meant they were going up and down on the waves, but they were in a storm. And it carries them over here to Malta. And I want you to look at Malta. It's a little bitty island. Over 300 miles that wind's going to blow them, and they just happened to blow them right into that island. Now, tell me God's hand is not in this. Watch what happens. And when neither sun nor stars in many days appeared. See, that's how they know where they are. They knew the stars. You can navigate by the stars. And they knew the sun. But it was overcast. Well, it's getting lighter, but I don't know if the sun's coming up over here or over there, and you can't see the stars. They had no idea where they were. And no small tempest lay upon us. And then this sad little bit. All hope that we should be saved was then taken away. They were just about ready to give up. But after long abstinence, Paul stood forth in the midst of them and said, Sirs, you should have hearkened unto me. Sounds like now Paul, the prisoner, is almost going to be in charge of the ship. And I think that's amazing that the prisoner is the one that rises to the forefront here. Out of 276 people, it's a prisoner that provides leadership for those people and gives them hope that they're going to be able to make it. It says, Sirs, you should have hearkened unto me, and not have loosed from Crete, and to have gained this harm and loss. And now I exhort you to be of good cheer. That word, that's one of my favorite Greek words in the Bible that's translated be of good cheer. It means be of good courage, be of good comfort, and be of good cheer. All three of those ideas are found in that one word. It could just as easily be translated be of good comfort, just as easily translated be of good courage. It's a courage, but it's not a courage of fear. It's to be cheerful in the midst of a storm like that, and to be comforted like this. Be of good cheer, he says, for there shall be no loss of any man's life among you but of the ship. Now, we're going to lose the ship, but we're not going to lose our lives. How did Paul know this? There stood by me this night the angel of God, whose I am and whom I serve. And then here's your memory verse, saying, Fear not, Paul, for thou must be brought before Caesar, and lo, God hath given thee all them that sail with thee. Look at that promise. God's going to save them all. Wherefore, sirs, be of good cheer, for I believe God, that it shall be even as it was told me. That is how, in the midst of the storms of life, we can have courage, and we can have comfort, and we can have cheer, because we believe God, and we believe it's going to be as He has told us, and we stand on the promises, don't we? And that gets us through those difficult times of life. Well, howbeit we must be cast upon a certain island. All this is going to occur just as Paul said. But I want you to note that promise. I'm going to get back to it. Didn't he promise? All God hath given thee, all them that sail with thee. We're going to learn something about the promises of God here in just a minute. When the 14th night was come, as we were driven up and down in Adria. Now there's the Adriatic Sea that is up there between Italy and Greece, but that's not this. This is south of that, down in the further into the Mediterranean, called the Adria. About midnight, the shipmen deemed that they drew near to some country. How did the shipmen know that? They were listening. You know, I've lived in the ocean, and I had stood at the edge of the ocean with a hurricane out in the ocean when I was down in West Palm Beach, Florida. And I guess you'd think if there's a hurricane coming, let's go see it. But they had already predicted it's going to go up the coast. It's not coming inland. We expect this hurricane to go up the coast. I said, Lord, let's go look at the waves, and the great waves, taller as this ceiling, come rolling in off that coast and hit that breaker wall, and boom against that wall. I mean, it just sounded like a boom going off. I understand that from the depths, they've gone out there and measured where would Paul have been. They would have been about a quarter mile away from shore, and they would have heard those booms, those waves against the coast of some island. The sailors figured out, we're getting near some shore. We better find out how deep it is. And so they sounded and found it 20 fathoms. And when they gone a little further, they sounded again and found it 15 fathoms. Look, we're getting shore. It's getting more and more shallow. That is what we heard, those breakers against that shoreline. And now they had a new problem. Fearing lest we should fallen upon rocks, they cast 4 anchors out of the stern and wished for the day. And I bet there was a powerful lot of wishing going on, don't you? Hope those anchors hold us off of this unknown coast where we could lose our lives while that wind blew and those waves beat against that ship and those anchors. See, we have an anchor that keeps the soul steadfast and sure while the billows roll. Don't we sing that song? Well, that's where Paul would get the idea about these anchors, wouldn't it? Holding that ship off for the danger in the darkness of night. If day would come, maybe we can see what we're doing, but in the night we just need to stay out here and hope those anchors hold us. And as the shipmen were about to flee out of the ship, those sailors were going to leave their passengers stranded. They had that boat. Remember that boat they pulled up? Hey, what we need to do, we need to get out of here. Let's let that boat down. We'll get in that boat. And we'll leave this ship, and then we can manage that little boat. They were about to flee out of the ship when they let the boat down into the sea, under color as though they would have cast anchors out of the forestern. We need to cast anchors off the other side. Let's get that boat and go do it. Paul knew what they were up to. Paul said to the centurion and the soldiers, except these abide in the ship, you cannot be saved. Then the soldiers cut off the ropes of the boat and let her fall off. No, we're all in this together. You guys aren't going to leave us abandoned out here. Cut the ropes. And they let the lifeboat go. Well, now they're all in it together. I want you to notice that phrase. I'm going to come back to it. Except these abide in the ship, you cannot be saved. I'll be there in just a minute. While the day was coming on, Paul brought all them to take meat, saying, this day is the 14th day that you'd tarried and continued fasting and had taken nothing. Now, I don't think that means they didn't eat a single thing. I think he's doing it the way my mother-in-law does me. When I sit down and I might be eating a sandwich, she says, well, you're not eating anything. Next thing I know, Miss Real has filled my plate back up with food. You know, she wants me to eat more and more. I think it's her goal that I'll be an old fat man sometime. She just keeps loading me up, you know. But she said, you all haven't eaten anything. And what that means is they hadn't sat down and had a good meal. Now, for 14 days struggling against those shores, they probably had a few things to eat along the way, but they really hadn't sat down for a good nourishing meal. And so I pray you, take some meat. For this is for your health. For there shall not a hair fall from the head of any of you. Isn't that an interesting expression? I'm not going to lose a hair. Not a hair fall from any of you. And when he had thus spoken, he took bread. And imagine this prisoner leading all these other prisoners and these sailors and these soldiers and those merchantmen. And Paul's going to lead them in prayer. He took bread and gave thanks to God in the presence of them all. And when he had broken, he began to eat. So, interesting prayer meeting they had there, wasn't it? And they were all of good cheer. And they took some meat. And we were all in the ship, 216 souls. That's 276, all right? And when they had eaten enough, they lighted the ship and cast out the wheat into the sea. And when it was day, they knew not the land. They didn't know where they were. They discovered a certain creek with a shore into which they were minded, if it were possible, to thrust the ship. See, if we can go into that little inlet, we can get that ship into that creek, and we'll be all right, and we'll anchor there. And when they'd taken up the anchors, they committed themselves to the sea, and loosened the rudder bands, and hoisted up the mainsail to the wind, and made toward shore. And falling into a place where two seas met, they ran the ship aground, and the forepart stuck fast and remained unmovable, and the hinder part was broken by the violence of the waves. They hit a sandbar out there, and they're not going to make it. And the ship is coming apart now. The soldiers' counsel was to kill the prisoners, lest any of them should swim out and escape. See, they're responsible to deliver those prisoners. And if those prisoners got away, then the soldiers had to take their place. So the first thing, let's kill the prisoners. Well, they'd kill Paul. And the centurion, willing to save Paul, kept them from their purpose and commanded that they which should swim should cast themselves first into the sea and go to land. And the rest, some on boards and some on broken pieces of the ship. And so it came to pass that they escaped all safe to land. Here's the little island of Miletus. It's called Malta today. In recent history, Malta is where Churchill and Roosevelt and Stalin sat down, had a conference where they divided out Europe between East and West Europe near the close of World War II. That was on the island of Malta. But it's a little bitty island. It's a little bitty, unimportant place. And that arrow is pointing to a bay that to this day is called St. Paul's Bay. Because it's believed this is where Paul shipwrecked, and it was in this bay where they swam ashore. There's Malta. That's a little bitty spot, isn't it? After 300 miles of open sea through a tempestuous wind, they just happened to come on this little bitty island. What if they were just a few miles south? Well, they would have missed it. A few miles north, they would have missed it. They came right in on that island. Don't you think God was guiding that ship through the storm and bringing it right where it needed to be? That island above is Sicily. And the peninsula above that is Italy. And about halfway up that Italian coast is Rome, and that's where they are headed. But now they're shipwrecked, and they don't know where they are. But we know later they're going to find out they're on this island of Malta. And that brings us to the end. Now here's what I want you to remember. I want to use this by way of illustration here, okay? Okay. It says, we'll all be saved. That was God's promise. You're not going to lose a hair of your head. They'll all be saved. But then Paul also said this, except ye abide in the ship, you cannot be saved. Now, how's that? God makes promises. Sometimes God's promises are conditional. Put it all together. We'll all be saved if we all abide in the ship. You have to meet the conditions of God's promise. This was not a promise of once saved, always saved. Yes, He promised them salvation. They were going to survive this. Every one of you are going to be saved. But you got to stay with the ship. That's the condition. Except ye abide in the ship. We know that word except. Except a man be born of water and of the Spirit, he cannot enter into the kingdom of God. What does except mean? It means if and only if. If and only if you stay in the ship, you'll be saved. If and only if you are born of water and the Spirit, you'll enter the kingdom of heaven. Except a man put away his wife. If a man put away his wife, except it be for fornication. What's that mean? If and only if it be for fornication. You marry another, you commit adultery. Except, look at the power of that word. Except ye abide in the ship, you cannot be saved. Now here's the analogy I want to make. Think of the Lord's church as the ship. God's promised He's going to save His church. He's going to do it. You're in the church, you're going to be saved. But you need to stay in the church. Except you abide in the church. Abide in me and I in you, Jesus said. You want to be saved? You can have good comfort from the promises of God through the storms of life, knowing that I'm going to be saved. But to do so, we need to abide in the ship. So don't jump ship. And if you have not stayed in the ship, if you have not entered or you have not stayed, then you are not saved. And so tonight we extend this invitation to come back, get back on board, to either get on board or get back on board. If you need to do that, come forward as we stand and sing this invitation song.